Hi guys, welcome back to Petite Perspective. Today it's just me, and that's because I'm going to give you basically a little rundown of some of my favourite thriller authors and kind of the books that I think you should be picking up if this is kind of like the genre that you want. I give you a bit of context. Have basically been reading thrillers since I was probably about like 12 or 13. So like I think I know them quite well. As a disclaimer, just so you all know, none of these are going to be Freedom McFadden books. None of them are going to be YA related thrillers like Your Good Girl's Guide to Murder, things like that. They're not really my kind of thrillers. To me, they're not kind of that suspenseful. They're not, I find them quite annoying. And that's nothing to do with like, you know, the author or anything. There's no shade on them. It's just, it's not my preference. And I think I've probably got a higher threshold in terms of what I like from a thriller. But anyway, let's get into it. Let's start with Lisa Jewell. So out of these three, I've read, out of all of, let's see actually. Okay, so I've probably read like 4, maybe 5 of Lisa Jewell's books. And what I really like about them is that they are so short, like the chapters are really short. And like you kind of get straight into the action like from the get-go, which is really like good. And what you find with Lisa Jewell is that like all of the characters in the book will kind of, they'll have their own separate stories, but then like at the end they kind of like all come together and it all kind of relates to each other. And I also find that you don't kind of necessarily know who is like responsible for whatever's going on, which I think I really like. And I think that is how you know if you've got a good thriller, because the worst part about thriller books is kind of figuring out like who, you know, is responsible for like the murder or whatever the story is. And kind of you get to the end and you're like, oh, well, like I figured that one out. Like it's quite nice to have suspicions like throughout, but then I like it when you get thrown like a curveball and you don't really know what's going on, which is kind of the theme with a lot of these books, to be fair. Which you definitely get from Lisa Jewell books. Out of all of the books I've read from her, I think I've only rated The Family Remains, I think, as a 4-star. But I think for thrillers, it's quite hard to get kind of like higher than like a 3. Like I think it's really hard to kind of beat that threshold. Like a 3 for me is that I really, really enjoyed it and would definitely recommend the book to people. 4 is like, I'm probably going to remember like what happened. And 5 is like, that book is like my Roman Empire, like will forever be cemented in my brain. And like none of Lisa Jewell's ones are like that, but they're all such a good time. And I've really, really enjoyed them. So if you are kind of looking for like that fast-paced book that still has kind of lots of different things going on, isn't necessarily always related to like crime or something, then she's definitely one to like go. So I definitely recommend her books. I've heard a lot of great things about None of This Is True. A lot of people say it's really good to listen to on Audible. Because it's like done as like a podcast. So I've obviously got the physical copy and I probably will just read it. But yeah, if you want to kind of start out with something, maybe start out with this one and listen to it and then see how you get on. But The Family Upstairs and The Family Remains are also quite good. Obviously they're, I guess, like a duology because they like link into each other. And even like towards the end of the second one, you still don't really know kind of like what's happened, but yeah, they're really good, really, really good. My next recommendation is J.P. Delaney. So J.P. Delaney wrote The Girl Before, which was turned into a BBC drama. That was the first J.P. Delaney book I ever read, I think, and really, really enjoyed it. And I think I've read every single one of his books apart from this one. This is the only one I have left to read. I've read every single one of them. This is my recent release. Wouldn't recommend reading this one. This one wasn't the same. It didn't hit the same. And it also annoys me that it's not the same colour. Like all of his other ones are lit like this grey colour and this one's like blue, which probably doesn't annoy most people, but it did annoy me. So yeah, so I wouldn't recommend this one. But if you did want to read J.P. Delaney, again, very similar vibes that you kind of don't really know what's going on. The best one that I've read so far is Playing Nice. I did give that one 5 stars because I quite possibly could not put it down. That one follows 2 like families who have children at the same time, and basically it turns out that their boys were swapped in the hospital at birth. But like it follows like the family dynamics and how they kind of like relate to each other and things like that, and how they're kind of intertwined in each other's lives, which was just really, really, really good. The Girl Before follows a girl who moves into his house, but the house is kind of like centrally controlled, and then all this weird stuff starts happening. But yeah, that one's also really good. So I do like JP Delaney books. I think you can always get kind of stuck into them. It's really easy to get into them, which I think is good. Again, the chapters aren't super long, which you will find is quite a theme in this. I think if you're going to do thrillers, you have to do short chapters, because I think that's how you kind of keep the reader kind of engaged. Leave me on a cliffhanger. If you leave me on a cliffhanger at the end of a chapter, I'm going to keep reading. I'm going to keep going until, you know, I can't go anymore. So yeah, so JP Delaney is a big yes from me. Lucy Clarke, another one. Again, this is one I haven't read out of. I've read quite a few of hers. Again, short chapters. You kind of don't really necessarily. What was the last Lucy Clarke one I read? The last Lucy Clarke one was One of the Girls, and it follows these 6 girls that kind of go on this bachelorette party, and they're kind of all interlaced in the story. Like, obviously some of them are friends. I think the sister-in-law is on there, and obviously the bride. But then one of them gets thrown off a cliff or falls off a cliff or something on the bachelorette party, and like it like follows that like whole story. So that one's good. Again, short chapters. The chapters are not very long in Lucy Clarke books, but you kind of, every kind of chapter you kind of want to know what's going on. I think a couple of her books have been turned into TV shows, including this one, The Castaways. This is one I haven't read yet. For good thrillers, you need like short chapters. Another one that is good is Leanne Moriarty. I think all of hers have been turned into TV shows now. I haven't read this one. I've read 9 Perfect Strangers. I gave that 4 out of 5 because it was so like a psychological thriller. Like, you don't really know what's going on, and your brain is a bit like confused and doesn't really like understand what's happening, which I think is really good. Big Little Lies is something I've always wanted to read. Haven't watched it because I wanted to read the book before watching it. So this is definitely one I want to read soon. But I remember, yeah, 9 Perfect Strangers, it kind of leaves you on a cliffhanger. There's lots of different stories going on, but they all kind of like link together towards the end, and you never really know what's going on, which I think is really good. And I think that's kind of how you know you've got a good thriller. Steve Kavanagh is another one, tried and true, tested. Love every single one of his books, hands down, one of my favourite thriller authors of all time. 13 is kind of like, I think that's the one I started with. Basically, he has this whole series, and this is one of them. They're the Eddie Flynn series, and they follow this like lawyer who's like a little bit, well, not corrupt, but like he like was, well, yeah, I suppose he's a bit corrupt, and he like basically helps people kind of through their cases, and all these people like happen to be innocent or something, but there's always like a little twist at the end, which is great. And the good thing about them is you kind of like, you follow the characters, so you kind of get to hear more about them in each of the ones, and different characters get kind of dragged in. But it's just really, really good. Like, every single one of the Eddie Flynn books is a tried and true. This, I think, is the only one I haven't read out of that whole series, which I'm very surprised I haven't read this one, because I've pretty much read every single one of Steve Kavanagh's books. I'm currently reading Kill for Me, Kill for You, which is his new release. Came out last year, I think. Again, that is such a good book, because you still, I don't know, there's just some of their writings, like, I think you have to be, what I really like about Steve Kavanagh books is that he relates it back to kind of, there's always like some kind of law related situation in it. He was a lawyer, and I think that's like kind of where he can kind of get that and put it in. But like, it's not just about kind of like the crimes. You follow like the judicial system and the whole trial bit, and that's the best part about the Eddie Flynn books, is like the whole trial bit, which I know Georgia really enjoyed. The Devil's Advocate, and I think they were like her first taste into the Steve Kavanagh and Eddie Flynn world, and she really, really enjoyed those. So I think if you kind of like hearing about like the judicial system, I mean, it is kind of American based, which is very bizarre, because, well, not bizarre, Steve is actually Irish, but all of his books are set in like New York, so they're just so good, and you can kind of fully immerse yourself in the story, and you really kind of understand the characters and kind of root for them and really like them. So if you want, and you don't like, no, I haven't. I think I might have started like reading them like in order, but you don't necessarily have to. But if you do, then you kind of see the progression of like the story, as in the main character story. So you've got like Eddie and his whole team, because obviously they're in every single one of the books. So you kind of see their journey and their character development like resolve as the stories go on. But you don't necessarily have to read them in that order, but you may spoil things for yourself if you read like the last one in the series before you read like the first couple, because things obviously happen in those stories that are like related to the main kind of core group of characters. But yeah, Eddie Flynn books, amazing. Some other ones that I made notes of are Alice Feeney. Again, very similar vibes to kind of like Lisa Joel, like in terms of you kind of get, it's like quite suspenseful. You get left on like a cliffhanger pretty much on every chapter, and you kind of, there's always a bit of a twist at the end. If I was to recommend one of Alice Feeney's books, it would be His and Hers. I think that's my favourite one. I wouldn't recommend Daisy Darker. It just, for me, didn't hit the same as all the other ones have. I'm yet to read her new one, which was Good Bad Girls, or Bad Good Girls. I think I'm about Good Bad Girls. That's the only one I haven't read, but I've kind of read the rest of her thriller repertoire, so I think I've got a good judge of kind of what the good ones are. So yes, don't read Daisy Darker, but do read Rock, Paper, Scissors and His and Hers, because those two are really good. Another good thriller writer is Alex Michaelides, I think that's how you pronounce his name, who wrote The Silent Patient and The Maidens and now The Fury. They are really good, really, really good. So I read The Silent Patient first, and again, it's kind of like that psychological thriller, so you don't really know what's kind of gonna happen, you don't kind of know where the story's going, and there's always a bit of a twist like at the end that you kind of least expect. Obviously a lot of his books, well, all three of them, are kind of somehow related to kind of Greek mythology, or like mention it at some point. But The Maidens and The Silent Patient are kind of interwoven. So there's like a point in The Maidens that kind of links to The Silent Patient. So it's quite nice to see that kind of, you know, they're technically standalones, but they kind of relate to each other because that's what the authors decided to, like, I guess, do. This is another one of my top tier thriller authors. Special mention goes to one of my favourite books of last year, which was Truth or Dare by M.J. Aldrich. Again, it's kind of a more of a crimey vibe one, but every chapter was left on a cliffhanger. I just wanted to keep reading. It didn't even matter to me that it was about like 600 pages for a thriller book, because like you just wanted to keep going. And towards the end, it kind of all wraps up quite nicely, and the person that you were least expecting or didn't really like consider to be a suspect in like the whole story. But yeah, so that's a really, really good book if you want kind of another like crime recommendation. Obviously I've read a lot of thriller books, and a lot of them I can't necessarily remember. Like they don't really stick out in my mind as being like amazing books. But going based off of my Goodreads, there are ones, but I've rated them kind of like 4 stars, but I actually can't remember the reason why, because I haven't really left a review. So if you did want to like hear of any of my other thoughts on any other books or any other recommendations, don't check out my Goodreads, because they're all on there, all the books I've ever read, I think. So there are a lot of other thrillers on there that I've not mentioned, that I'm not mentioning in today's video, that I would recommend to people. But I can't tell you why, because this was the reason why I started my Instagram, because I couldn't remember the reasons for liking books, and now I need to start actually reviewing them, which definitely makes it easier to remember why you like a book and why you didn't like a book. So yes, there's a lot on there. I am going to give a special mention to this book, which I read, I think it was the last book I finished, I think it might have been, which is Murder in the Family by Cara Hunter. Now the reason why I'm giving this a special mention is not because it's exceptional, because the ending really fell flat for me. Like it could have been a lot better. It felt like it was wrapping it up too quickly, and the way it ended, I was a bit like, so that's not why it's getting an honourable mention. The reason this is getting an honourable mention is because of the way this book is laid out. So it's basically set out as if it was like a TV show. So each of the chapters, there's only like 8, kind of is set up as if like it was a show, I guess. So yeah, so like here you've got like the episode like showrunner things, and then it like goes into like the actual like layout as if it's like a script, which made it really, really easy to get through. But like at different points you've then got like different bits, so it basically follows like this whole like case they're revisiting, and it has like different points in it. I'm trying to find one where they're talking about like newspaper cuttings. It's got the newspaper cuttings in there, or at the end of each chapter there's like emails between like some of the characters, and then like some text messages between like some of the characters. So yes, you've got like voicemails and these like emails and stuff, which I thought was a really like different way of doing things, and and I've never kind of read, especially not a thriller book, like that's not, oh yeah, and this bit is quite cool. So they've got like, the way it's done, so you, at the beginning of each chapter, you have like a newspaper article written about like what that episode was like, and then, or the last episode even. And then here is like a forum, like, and it's all like the different commentary from like people who are like watching the show. So it's really, really clever. Like the way it's written is so clever. It just, the ending just really fell flat. And think it could have been a lot better. I kind of suspected who it could potentially be. But in my head I was thinking, no, that's not who it's going to be. And thinking that I was going to get like a shock. And it wasn't going to be what I expected, but it was. But the way it kind of wrapped up was just, it could have been done a lot better. So that's, I would recommend it for the way that it's set up. Wouldn't recommend it because of how good the story is, if that makes sense. But the way it's kind of written was really cool. So I definitely think that's worth kind of having a read of. If you want something slightly different, just a little bit, you know, a little fun, a little different. They are, I would say, my top kind of thriller recommendations. So if I was to give you kind of a roundup of who I think, like what books I think you should read, Steve Kavanagh, any book that he's ever written, to be honest, because they're all great. Leanne Moriarty, I've only read 9 Perfect Strangers, but I really, really enjoyed that book. Would definitely recommend it. Gave it 4 stars. So we'll go with that one until I've read Big Little Lies and can maybe give this one as a recommendation. Lucy Clarke, again, I've read a couple of her books. None of them kind of stick out to me as like amazing, but they are good if you want something fast paced, that's easy to read in short chapters. So I would recommend her books, any of them. JP Delaney, they're all standalones, so you can read any of them, but my top tier one is definitely Playing Nice. That is a 5-star read for me last year, and definitely one that I think everyone should read. Lisa Jewell, again, fast paced, all of her books are great, they're all standalones. Do think The Family Remains, The Family Upstairs and The Family Remains are the best of all of them. They're kind of interlaced together and I think they're really good. So I would recommend those 2. Alex Michaelides, would recommend any of his books. He's only got 3, so it's not that hard to like kind of do. But The Silent Patient will always be my favourite. It was the first one of his that I read, and is definitely one I would recommend. Alice Feeney, absolutely read Alice Feeney. Don't read Daisy Darker because it's not that good, but any of her other books are great, and my top one would be Rock, Paper, Scissors or His and Hers. And I think that's it. Like I said earlier, if you want to find out anything else that I've read in this kind of thriller genre and I've rated quite highly, I can't give you any reason why, but they must have been good because I find it quite hard to rate, especially thrillers, higher than a 3. So check out my Goodreads. I'll leave a link in the description below so you can kind of have a look at what I've read. I'll also link Georgia's so you can see what she's read as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tell all your friends about us. We'll try and do a sit down video together, but it won't be based on our favourite genre because we both don't have the same taste in books. But yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!